Right, this is going to be another episode of Thorin's Big Brains, and for this one, my guests are going to be KingT, who you will have seen on some of my watch parties. He's also been on some past episodes of my talk shows, and obviously he is a guy who has a YouTube channel where he breaks down like players and stuff like that. But the key thing I would say is this: it's not just the generic like here is a round from a game you saw. Like there's a million people doing that angle. KingT actually tries to like do like profile pieces on people. Like for example, I'll give you a very topical case. If people want a quick video that could help explain, like, for example, how good some of the mouse players are that joined that team. He's done a bunch of those when they were in the academy team, basically, and like prospective players. So actually the good thing as well now is that archive actually is probably aged like fucking fine wine, because I've no doubt like most of those players from the last 2 years, they are the tier 1 players now, right? Aren't most of those the people that got promoted and joined the big squads?
Yeah, there's some really huge ones, some massive hits. There's a couple hidden whiffs, but we don't talk about those. We talk about Fame, we talk about Tosh, we talk about Yabby, and we talk about these kind of guys because they really have just flown up in terms of people's esteem.
Oh, there you go. There's one right there. If anyone wants to see Fame, who obviously just won the major, go look at the video he did from way back when he was in way smaller teams. And then obviously Paladin's done a bunch of stuff with me recently. We do the Rescope show semi-frequently, keyword semi-frequently. Obviously, to be fair, it's a big debate topic. It's not really like a weekly show anyway. And he's obviously done a bunch of dream hacks and other such events. Right. First things first, I thought what we could do for this, I know it's like basically like when people are watching it, it's only going to have a few hours, but I thought there hasn't actually been that much content that's trying to actually like preview Blast World Finals. Like people have done the thing of like, the joke is, nowadays, it feels like esports is becoming whack, guys. It's not a sport. It's like everyone will talk about, like, what about the country it's in and the culture, and what about their social, like, what about the fucking teams? You know, it's like 6 or 7 of the best teams of the entire year meeting at one last massive event with loads of prize money. Like, I think that's a pretty big storyline. Am I missing something? Like, what? Like, aside from Heroic, who has a standing, and even there, by the way, there's probably a lot we can even talk about that. It's quite an interesting standing angle. There's all these teams except Heroic and OG are bangers. Like, these are the absolute best teams in the world, pretty much. There's only Cloud9's missing. Aside from that, if you were to make like a dream event of like the big name teams and put all the, you'd pick these teams. So I think people are missing the fact that it's the last event of the season. Remember, it's going to be another player break. We've already had the major, and this really is like, I don't think anyone's falling this one in. Aside from Heroic, who's taking the stand in, I think everyone really wants to win this last event and go out on a high. So let's start out here, right? KingT. What we'll do is we'll just go through, I think we'll just do each team. There's only 8 teams. Let's just do each team and get people's thoughts on them, see where they're at and see what convos come out. Let's just start with the one that on paper is supposed to come last place. But I actually think there's even an interesting discussion there. This even ties in what I was talking about before about up and coming players and people that have moved up. It's got to be OG, of course. Right, on paper, OG are the one that's like, look, you would have put like a Cloud9 or someone in that spot if you wanted to have the absolute best teams in the world, or maybe in current form of Furia or something. But not only did they like get like true, it is a bit scuffed the qualification, I will say, as to how they got there. It's not really that great. Like they did like one little run at the first fucking spring finals, basically. But with that said, I actually think people are going to sleep on this team because they're going to just see like on Liquipedia, like they didn't even do anything. They came last for like the major of it. It's like this team actually has fucking skill in it, boys. Like I don't. It has flaws clearly, but I actually think these players are probably underrated in terms of skill. What do you think, KingT? What do you think of OG?
Well, skill's not really the debate here. I think anyone who's watched them, who knows who these players are, should be aware that they're highly skilled, got great fragging potential. Neofrag is, well, he's one of the, I think he's episode 2 of Prospects. I believe he's quite an OG one in that sense. But he's really come leaps and bounds, but he still plays the same sorts of things. He's high impact positions. You flash him into fights. You let him take like the challenges on Vertigo and Ramp, these sorts of brawls, and he'll win a lot of them. The problem this team has really is Fiku isn't another star player. And with Dexter not really firing off at the same level he was in Spirit, their frag first, think later sort of play style has let them down. But that's also kind of what makes them dangerous. You come into this, you think, they're not fragging too hard. Sorry, we're not going to have too much tactics to deal with them, like from them. Maybe we'll be okay just coasting, but they'll probably come into this event with low expectations, knowing this is their last chance to have a big impact at the end of the year. And I think they'll turn up the frags, and yet, as you said, really dangerous coming into this, not to be discounted.
What do you think, Paladin? Where are they at for you?
I think definitely their peaks are fantastic. There's no denying that. But we have also seen a lot of the low lows that this team has shown so far. I think back to ESL Challenger Melbourne, where they're dropping maps and series against Chinese teams of Wings Up. And that's basically where kind of all of the firepower that you want to hit those peaks kind of just disappear. You have Neofrag, who, yes, I think that he definitely can deliver certain high impact series, but it's not consistent enough to be that second man alongside Dexter. And as you said before, KingT, I think Fiku has always been a very glaring issue for this team overall. He has very difficult roles, yes, but overall, he hasn't been able to kind of at least showcase that he is good in those roles, if that. I mean, he's a very young player, still has time to develop and whatnot. But for this roster and this set of 5 players, I don't think he's cut out to play this level just yet. I think that he's got a lot to go. And it's been this way, not even from the get-go. It's been like this for all of the 6 months that he's been on this roster. I haven't been impressed by him very much. And overall, I think beyond Dexter, I haven't consistently seen a second man that can follow up with what he's providing to the table. And that's my issue overall with OG, that they can't reach those peaks consistently. Beyond the spring finals, I haven't seen anything that suggests to me that this team deserves to be in the top 10.
It's funny because I know... Yeah, go on, KingT, jump in.
Sorry, I should step in there because we have kind of both seemingly forgotten FlameZ, who is the top performer on this team really recently. Dexter has not been himself. The last 3 to 6 months, last few big events they've played at, Dexter has not been close to that spirit level. That's actually been FlameZ really the best player of the team. It's just then what do you follow up with when Dexter's not free ball and do whatever he wants, taking all these picks. If he's still got that freedom and he's putting up these numbers and you're not getting the results, then you have to start reining him in and start thinking about other plans, because FlameZ has actually been fine. Just Dexter's been the big issue, and then Neofrag hasn't been able to basically fill the void, because that's kind of what you'd hope from that point onwards, is that Neofrag would step into that void, and he hasn't. So for me, it's weird. We didn't mention FlameZ. It feels like he's such a fixture in the team. We always forget, because he does rarely drop off, but he has been fine. It's more the rest of the team we have to talk about.
Yeah, the thing with this team for me is people will know I'm like a critic of Nexa as an IGL. I actually think, by the way, as a player, he's a good player. He's actually a pretty decent fragger, even as an IGL he frags, which is sort of what's got him by in G2 and then now in this team. But I have to say, the reason why on this particular lineup I'm also not that impressed, although I will say I'll probably try and do some content with him and try and get his perspective on leading. So he's a very amiable guy, if people don't know. Like, he is someone who could definitely take criticism. I just have never personally had like a public interaction with him. I've only like DM'd him a few times. But basically, my issue is, since I agree he could be a good fragging IGL, it's like, bro, where is all this firepower in the actual game? Like, when I look on paper, if he's going to be like a fraggy IGL, every other player we just mentioned can frag. Like, the joke there is Fiku's supposed to be your second worst player. And then you've got people like Flames, who's had now a couple of years to develop. Dexter looked amazing on Spirit. Like, if Neofrag only has to be a second or third, but you know what I mean? Like, this team should have produced way more than it has thus far. So I am concerned about, like, I don't think the mix has worked. And another thing I've noticed in Counter-Strike that's a bit weird, it reminds me actually a little bit of how sports tend to work. Another reason, I know this isn't a super team, but another reason stacking too many skilled players who could be like your 1 or 2 option don't seem to work is because what happens is you actually find that the ones who don't get that star role just like that, you in your mind you think, right, well, they'll like frag just like 80% of what they know. They tend to actually just become bang average players, and especially if you've given them like specific spots or roles that aren't even about being like some mad frag, they just won't be that good. You'll find like this every time. You'll keep going, but imagine if they all came online at the same time. It's like, that never happens, mate. Like, that's the problem. I almost think, as mad as it sounds, part of it's maybe the youth of pros in esports. I almost think, like, for real, like a team like Vitality is a way easier mess to figure out than this is. Because in Vitality, it's just obvious. Like for example, when you watch Vitality, so we know Zero's going to be amazing. Now the question is, how do we work Spinks it? Like, it's streamlined. You know where you want certain people. You know, you want the experience, where you want the calling, where you want the like fucking the support play. You know where all this. In a team like this, I feel like this is a really good set of players, but I don't think they've figured out the mix. So if they have, certain people have never got the memo and aren't doing the role that suited them in their past teams. Like, some of these players were better in their past team. Even Dexter, quite frankly, in the example there, yeah. Like, when he was on Spirit, he looked, eye test wise, like a guaranteed. You drop him in any team, plug and play, amazing instantly. But I agree, he's been slightly underwhelming. He still puts up numbers, but that's the thing. I had higher expectations. I thought this guy really could be like top 10 player in the world or something crazy, you know, and really like push the boat out. So they've been a bit underwhelming for me. The reason why, though, I think it's actually perfect for an event like this, though, is because not only do they have all this skill, but I also think, logically, in light of what I said in the preamble, they should have zero pressure at this event. Nobody's going to shit on them if they come last place. In the way that the tournament works and the names, even if you, by the way, just lose close games, people will probably give you credit. And by the way, if you get any upsets, if you get any scalps, and remember, they're actually starting out against The heroic team, the one that has the stand-in, so they're even potentially going to play a team that's never played like an official game together. So, like, I think there is some upset potential for this team. I don't think they can make a deep run, but I wouldn't be surprised if they win maps and maybe even that series. What do you think?
I think of all the teams that should be picking into Anubis, that's definitely one perspective about this. It's a wild card pick. You're a wild card team.
Yes.
If you want to throw a curveball into the veto, you definitely have the capabilities to do so. Maybe not against Heroic in the opening round because they can probably just permaban it outright. But against Navi or Vitality in that lower bracket, I mean, I think it's totally fine to use that. Or even in the upper final if they do manage to get a series win. And that in and of itself could completely change the dimension of the tournament altogether, just because of that one map. You've got plenty of time to prepare for that map in particular, with not being able to play in the fall final. I think all signs are pointing to them trying to curve the veto into their favor.
By the way, one thing I thought we could also do on this is we don't have to, like, everyone doesn't have to be in a full preview of the team. Just hit whatever points or angles you have on each team. So do you want to go to the next team? Do you have a point to finish off on KingT there?
No, I just felt, just to add on to that idea, they do not really have a good pick to go to right now. Like, their best map they've picked, like, results-wise, has been Inferno. That's not exactly a map most teams want to pick. It's a map you leave for third, otherwise you're going to get out-vetoed. So, yeah, Anubis, great idea to go into it, prep it hard, pick it, and see if you can win some of those brawls, because when a map is new and not figured out, you are going to get a lot more of these messy encounters, big fights everywhere. This could be a map they should lean into.
Right, what about then? Let's just do the heroic team, where obviously, look, the sexy narrative's not going to get a chance to play out, which is, could they have repeated what they did at Blast 4? Would they be as good, blah, 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 maybe even play a FaZe again? Obviously, that's not going to be the case, because the best player in their team the whole year's down is the player who's missing, and they've also brought in, where, look, on paper, it's a totally fine trade. You could do this for an event with Config. The problem is, obviously, Config is bringing a whole ton of baggage, where we haven't seen him play since actually he lost to Heroic, funnily enough, in that game at Pro League, if people remember. I know he played some online match, but like, who gives a fuck about that? And then obviously he had the whole leg injury, and then he had the drama where he got kicked from Astralis, and then there was the Endless Jackson drip feed of all the things that happened in that. And so, like, right now, what's mad is, if you go and look on betting websites, this team is still getting, like, they're being put as favourites by people, even when this information is known, and people, it's crazy, I know, and people are betting them as a favourite for these matches, which is bizarre to me. But I'm interested to see where you guys go on this one. What Paladin? Give me an angle on Heroic. What are you interested to talk about with this team?
So I did a video recently about them, and I wanted to figure out kind of what their system is like, just personally for myself. And you get to figure out that Cadian's got a very well-oiled machine of a system going on. And Stown is the player that is not necessarily playing static roles. He's the one that is all around the map, trying to plug in kind of the places in where they want to push for map control. And in particular, I think that if you plug and play Config into that scenario, it's a very risky move for sure, but I could see some upside from it entirely. Maybe I know Stown isn't necessarily the player that would go to make some of these crazier, riskier moves, but Config, if you get the upside of Config, you could have an incredible team, and a team that could potentially have a little bit more of that X factor that you might not get with other iterations of heroic lineups, where you didn't have that superstar player that would kind of shine above the rest. I mean, Stown is very much a system player and shines within the kind of thing that Cadian has created, but Config can kind of break the mold in that sense. Obviously, it's a risk in the sense that he hasn't played much. We don't know what the kind of level he's at. He's still recovering from his injury. But if you had to write a narrative where Heroic find a way to bounce back and take some serious scalps, Config is not a bad player to take a bet on.
Yeah, actually, I do like that sort of the way you've characterized Heroic's system. And then you do kind of think maybe Config gets put in, maybe he doesn't know exactly the timings, every single flash, every single movement. But if you just tell him, figure it out, because everyone else is so solid, everyone knows exactly what they're doing, just let him kind of figure out, this will be a floating point variable. He gets to do a little smoke push every now and then. Still things you see Stown do, but it's clearly far more set up. You just let him improvise it. I think you could adapt your system to fit around him. And yeah, as we all know, Config, when he's on it, when he's really on his game, he's one of the best riflers in the game, like in the scene. It could work out. I'm not going to bet on it, because I honestly think after this sort of hiatus, the way it happened, he's not going to have his mental fully into it. He says he's hyped. That's always easy to say in a press conference. It's a lot harder to show in a server. So I'm not too sold on them going deep, but I think there is basically viability to this sort of roster. Just unfortunately, it had to come now.
The interesting thing is, like, I recently did one of those Strapbook episodes with the coach of OG, Rugger, who previously worked in Optic and North with Config. And he addresses a little bit there about what he thought about this potential move, which is that, like, basically, he actually thinks that in theory, this is actually maybe the best role you could put Config in. He actually thinks the flaw Config has is in teams where he lets himself be the guy where he is told, like old school Freakazoid style, like, just run through a brick wall, please, mate. Like that type of entry play. Like he actually thinks the best thing you can do because of how crazy an aimer Config is give him the player where someone else makes the space and then he takes the space and creates all the kills from it. And I sort of agree because here's an interesting detail I've known through both behind the scenes knowing Config's teammates and looking at how like roster moves have changed his form. He seems like a guy, and this is going to be this is why it's an interesting point to make. It's going to shock a lot of people because he gives off this brash persona that he is just like he's very unusual for a Danish player. You'll notice usually they're all about like the team and the team structure. The team is bigger than me. Like they're all about like good behavior, professionalism, being like a true sportsman. He's a bit more of a rock and roller, as people notice, and he certainly seems like a very brazen, like arrogant figure. Even maybe if people seen him talking shit or heard some of these incidents with him fighting. But what I think they might miss about his career is I actually think, because this is a common trend, by the way, if you've just ever met people, oftentimes the guy who goes out of his way to flex all the time that he's just a confident guy, that's actually masking insecurity. And what I'll tell you is if you go and look in Config's career, the times when he's done the worst, so in my opinion, when he was in the Optic team with Snappy, and then I would also say, actually, I think, look, it wasn't bad, but I think actually some of this year, when he's been in Astralis, hasn't been as effective as people thought. One of the reasons why is, in my opinion, when he himself, for whatever reason, has an insecurity, like maybe I'm not in the best form or like I think his version of duty is he thinks he just has to be the like smash through a brick wall entry. And if you do that, like I've seen this happen a lot. People might know famously the story in Mouse Sports that changed the same lineup from being like a say like 8th place team to Carrigan winning those events and find all they did was take ROPS, and famously one of the examples was on CT side Mirage. He used to just play rain style on the fucking ramp of Mirage on the A site, and since that's like a one and done position, they just realised, wait a minute, this is a waste of, why are we having ROPS there? If it's one and done, he's going to be dead after one kill. Why don't we put him in the connector where he's got, he can take it, or short, or one of the two, one of those positions, like a high fragging position. Basically the problem is I actually think Config's an example of a player where it's like you almost have to do it the other way. You have to tell him, no, you are going to be my star player. No, I'm going to set you up this way. No, he's going to take care of that. You don't you worry about that. I'm going to put you in position to frag and stuff. So I think in this team, by the way, that's also why I think this one event run might work as well. Because since they crucially have lost their best player, and I'm sure they know themselves we're probably not winning the event, you just give him his spot, don't you? You just go, right, I'll set you up. See if you can frag out. If you can, we've got a chance. If you haven't, we're fucked anyway. Let's just enjoy the holiday. So I actually think, again, this is another team I don't think actually has pressure on them. I don't even think there's that much pressure on Config, quite frankly. Like, no one's really going to judge his whole career on this one run. And if anything, if you just show us anything more than people expect, like if you actually just show a couple of good games, you probably do good for your career and good for the potential to move to other teams in the future. So I actually think that's an interesting angle on that one, because I got the vibe. Put it this way, essentially, I asked people when he was in teams like Optic, like, why are you using him like that? That's such a waste. And they would just essentially tell me, like, oh no, we're not telling him to do that. Like he chose to do that role. Like he wanted that. So I think he's just one of those pros that has like a weird perception of himself. And so I know it sounds mad because people think pros never do this. There's a lot of pros actually sometimes opt into bad roles. Famously, it's supposedly what people tell me JKS did in Complexity. What happened is he's too amiable a guy, and when it wasn't working out, he naively thought, like, well, I'll just take whatever role's left, which is like, no, we're paying you to do your best role, mate. Like, never mind that. But in his brain, he's trying to be a good guy. So it might sound counterintuitive, but I think there's a bit more to that angle. What about this then? That's not a team we have to talk about much. I wanted to just get that topic out of the way. Let's move on to a spicy one then. So KingT, here's what I want to know is this. Everyone was telling me they were loving this Team Liquid when they got Yekindar, when they had the Cologne run, when they did this run at Pro League. Everyone was telling me, oh, this is the future, this is it. And everyone was telling me going into the major, this is a contender. You know, the teams that can win the major, it's like FaZe now. And then everyone within their top 5 was getting to Team Liquid, right? What do you think of Team Liquid now, and can they win this event?
This is a team I've struggled and battled with, I think, mentally and in conversations with other people, just trying to figure out. I like Yekindar generally, and on this team it seemed to be a quick fix, but unfortunately it's not really seeming like it's a long-term solution, and it's created another problem where I think the issue more lies in what is Nitro doing here? Because he's clearly not the greatest tactical IGL. He's clearly not doing hard entry, like, run through smokes, do the nonsense that Yekindar does to create space, even though Yekindar does it to get kills. Like, he's clearly taken up this weird role, which doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. Like, Prime, Liquid, Nitro Liege entry duo, we're not seeing that. And we're not seeing some tactical masterclass. So it's just a pain to wrap your head around as to where do you make the change? How do you make this change? And can you make it work with Nitro? That's the final little, maybe there's an edge case where you make it work with Nitro, maybe change up what Liege is doing, but I just don't like the look of this team. I think their map pool is okay. They're still going to win like probably at least one series here, even though they are in a tough group. But I don't really get the roster right now. It's doing my nutting.
Where are you at, Paladin?
I will completely admit that I was one of those people that very, very high on Liquid initially.
You are from North America, so we will give you a slight pass on that one, don't
exactly.
we? It's okay. I hope everyone has to have it, of course.
Exactly. But over time, I've also been very apprehensive with exactly what you're saying, KingT. Nitro in his role on this team, he's playing very middle of the pack roles. It feels as though he is trying to, he's put into positions where he can get numbers. It's not like he's put into scenarios where he shouldn't be getting numbers. And I think his best event thus far was the fall finals. And even that, it was kind of a mind-blowing series against Na'Vi that honestly sample size suggests that it is a flash in the pan. It is not going to happen again. And I think the biggest issue as of right now for me, more than Nitro, is that Elige doesn't look like the prime Elige that we were looking for. And yeah, you got Yekindar, and he's hard carrying you through games. You've got consistent NAF, obviously producing numbers for you. And OC's hit or miss, but I don't think that OC should be the end-all, be-all for deciding this game. I think it should be, is Elige comfortable? Can Elige frag out? And I just don't think that he's comfortable right now. And I don't know if it's the system. I don't know if it's Elige not feeling comfortable with what Nitro is producing fragging-wise. I don't know what it is, but I think that a priority for this team should always be, is Elige comfortable? Can he produce the numbers? Because right now he looks mortal against top 10, top 5 teams, and that is an issue in my opinion. I think that this team lives and dies by him and him alone, and it always has been. That's been the Liquid identity for quite some time now. And as you're saying, I think Yekindar is a short-term solution because now you're starting to see the cracks within the system where Nitro isn't necessarily producing enough numbers. Elige doesn't feel comfortable. OC seems bang average. And really, you're looking towards NAF to kind of plug all your holes, and he's such a valuable piece for this Team Liquid roster, but it's not enough to kind of let everything else fall by the wayside and just give them all the keys to the castle that they're a great team right now.
Yeah, I think that's fair. One of the problems with this team, if you notice, is it's actually something I've been thinking about a lot more in terms of like roster moves, which is the trickiest roster moves I've noticed is where you keep adding players. This is basically essentially what Henry G did wrong with Cloud9. You keep adding players where it's like, yeah, he's all right, actually. Let's see what the next player is. I mean, he's all right. Let's just see. And then eventually at the end of the team, you're like, where's all the best players? Like, if I'm going to be the number one team in the world, I need a bunch of banger players. Like, I'd actually rather, like, in my opinion, this is a bit of a tangent. I'd rather have a problem like Vitality where I have like a godlike player like Zero and then I just figure out the other players than where it's like I've got a bunch of good players. I think Mouse is like this. I've got a bunch of good players, but like there's not one player that's realistically like a top 5 player in the world. There's not really anyone who's like the best at their role. We're like good at a bunch of maps, but we're not the best on them. You know what I mean? Like I actually think it's worse to sort of be like pretty good, but not the best at any one element, either star player or IGL or best on this one map. I actually think it's a lot easier to work with limited variables in that sense. So that's the problem I have with the Liquid move. I think they've sort of made moves over the year, which have gradually gotten to the point like they are now, where they're like, what, let's say like the 6th best team or the 7th best team in the world. The issue is though, because they don't have like mega strengths anywhere, they're not that team that's like, well, we're 6th. Like in my opinion, this is what Outsiders was. Like, we're 6th, but like, hey, maybe we could win the event. Like we did. I mean, they obviously did the miracle run, but that's the problem I have with Liquid at the moment is I actually even feel like everyone could have a different, like the Nitro angle's a very valid one. He's a fucking terrible individual player, except for that one fucking series at Blast that just temporarily boosted him. And then also they're hardly getting props for an amazing fucking led team. And then on top of that, you have every bloody interview. Your Kindar's like, by the way, I had taught me how to breathe and walk and chew bubblegum. Like, there's that as well. So, like, the problem with that one that I don't think everyone's thought through on Liquid is, if that is true, then it's making Nitro look even worse, you idiots. Like, the minimum we needed to do was, you guys just don't know what he's doing. And in the comms, you know, he's straight fire. He's calling everything right. It's us fucking it up. Because I agree, the Nitro one's an obvious one. The joke is the OC one, which I've been a big bugbear man. It's not even the biggest problem, mate. Look, it's not a great scenario, but it's not even the biggest problem. Like you say, up and down. Sometimes he has good games. Sometimes he's all right. He's fine. And then the Elige one is a big concern because the problem is, on paper, that's the one player you do not consider cutting, especially because you hope he does get back to peak form. And he has been mega hit and miss. Like the scary thing about Elige is, it's not even like he just has like 3 bad months. He'll have like a good event and then just a terrible event. And it's like, there's not really a logic, it seems, to which one it is. So on the Liquid one, I'm open to all possible solutions. I think something has to change, in my opinion. I wouldn't stick with this lineup now. I know they've only just got Yekindar, but they've realistically had him for 6 months now. Like, there's just been a real lineup. So I still feel like I would make a move, but I'm totally open, by the way, as to what the move would be. It doesn't have to be my boy OC goes for someone else. You could do, like, the IGL one would be a very interesting one. There's another one. The other reason why I think the Nitro card has to stay on the table is because the difference is, this is where it all depends on name as well. If I told you, oh, I'm bringing in, like, doesn't have to be Carrick, could be like MSL. If I told I'm bringing MSL into Team Liquid tomorrow, you'd at least give him a chance with these players before you start cutting people. You'd go, oh, whoa, let's see how he uses this player. And then how he sets all, you know, that would be an interesting prospect. So that makes me think they should consider that. Sadly, though, I will say, this might sound fucked up, but there's a detail people in CSGO don't know, which is when I did my interview with Steel, the former CSGO in-game leader of Chaos and all those teams, when I asked him about when he was in Valorant and he played in 100 Thieves with Nitro, and Nitro was the IGL of that team, he said that at one point, Nitro's... Dude, people haven't got this in CSGO. This is genuinely info no one else has picked up on. He said that Nitro at one point in time told him something like, oh, Alicia's coming soon or whatever. Like, Alicia was going to switch to Valorant, apparently, and become like a player in their team. That was really on the table at one point in time. Obviously, this is when like Liquid wasn't doing that well, right? That alone is not only a bit disturbing because it implies maybe he was thinking about leaving the game, but the bigger issue to me is this. Good luck getting Nitro out of fucking Team Liquid then. If he's really boys with fucking Legion, that's like his described like best friend or whatever. I think Twist said the same shit when he was in the team before. Those are the hardest players to cut because there's a social tie. People get black. They're not going to look at the server there. What they're going to think of is these things. And this is not what we're analysing as analysts. They're going to think of things like, is he a good communicator? Does he cause problems? Like, is he a cool guy? Does he work hard? Like, these are all great things to have, but you have to also be able to do it in the server. And so unfortunately, like, I don't think Team Liquid's considering the Nitro move. I think it's a valid one to put forward. I think it has to at least be discussed as a potential problem in the team. Should we move on to another team? Is there anything more with Liquid?
It's such a complicated issue that I genuinely don't feel as though that I have a solid solution either. I mean, I'd love an import IGL. I think this team does definitely have space for it to continue to keep the NA spot and all of that and go through the RMR system. And they've got time to ramp up as well with the kind of the schedule. I mean, doing a roster move at the end of the year like this is the perfect time to do that. But yeah, I think if you have societal ties like that, it's just never going to happen. And for that reason, I mean, maybe you look to maybe OC, but even then, what kind of import AWP would you bring in? It's kind of nominal with the kind of players that you could potentially pick. So overall, I'm kind of just like on Liquid, and I don't think we'll ever see them lift the trophy with this lineup.
Let's talk about the dreaded G2, shall we? Should we just, well, go on, what were you going to say?
No, I mean, just thinking about AWPing stuff quickly, I was just like, there are AWPers you could have brought in, not now, but like a little while ago.
Oh, for sure.
Mm-hmm. And that would have, like, bringing in a Dexter who's, you know, free and crazy and impactful probably shifts the balance of this team in a way that, you know, we're looking at a different roster now, but unfortunately, probably not making that move. Thanks in part to OG having signed him. So it's pretty doom and gloom in terms of other moves you can make. You're not cutting Naf, you're not cutting a Liege, and then your Kindar would make no sense to cut. So they're probably going to sit around and be 5th best in the world for a long time.
They almost certainly will. I think they just keep this lineup and run to the next major minimum would be my guess. Right, Paladin. What about G2 then? Obviously, this is a team that has been discussed to death over the last few months, up and down. Like, I know everyone's super hyped on them. Now everyone's bailed on them. The problem is, this is, in theory, maybe the last event this lineup will exist, because it's heavily implied, if you look at who they brought in to the org and what they've been implicating, that, spoiler, they're probably just going to kick Huxley and get a different IGL, or Hunter will be IGL. You know, one of those moves. Or maybe the dreaded Nico IGL. Who the fuck knows? But it's basically, they're implying, like, Huxley's gone. So, being as this is the last run, what are your thoughts on this G2 team, Paladin?
I have zero expectations. I mean, I think they are clearly just coasting through everything right now. I mean, you look at their map pool, it is non-existent. I mean, you look at some of these players, they all look checked out. I mean, I think Nico looks checked out. Hunter has completely lost his mojo. I mean, I think this player was touted as to be that second star alongside Nico, and they're supposed to do all this damage and kind of shake up the scene. And when they had their Amanek roster with Jax as well, this was the two individuals that would carry this team, and Hunter is non-existent at this point, in my opinion. I mean, he's at the middle of the table, and sure, you've got Modesty and Nico putting up numbers, but I have higher expectations from Hunter after what I've seen he is capable of at the world's biggest tournaments. And him not being comfortable in the roles that apparently Xtaz chose for him. Like he said, he came to that conclusion that these are the roles that he wanted. And if he's uncomfortable in those roles specifically, then what more do you kind of want for him to feel a little bit more comfortable in that sense? Obviously, JKS is been talked about a myriad of different places, and I echo very similar sentiments. He's a very average player, being touted as something greater than, and I think the move from Jax to JKS was a very lateral move in terms of T sides, and in terms of CT sides, obviously it's an upgrade, but at the end of the time, you're also losing the intangible of energy. I mean, he's not the most energetic player out there, and clearly that is found to be a huge issue for this team. I don't really see too much energy from this roster anymore when they take to the server. You finish through a series, you win a great series. I don't really feel as though this team is happy that they've won. It just feels like a little bit of pressure has been released, and it all comes back crashing down once they take to the server into their next series. And overall, I think this team needs a coach that can put them in their place and make sure that everything is kind of tip-top shape going into that next event. I think they definitely need an IGL change. Obviously, I don't want to bang on Hooksy too much because it's been done to death by everybody. But obviously, I think that this team just needs huge restructuring across the board. IGLing, I think that their CT anchor of JKS should be changed. I think they need a more stoic coach. And I think that they need to find a way to unlock Hunter again, because I still feel as though he's not his former self.
Yeah, that's pretty much the sum of all the parts that's going wrong, really. It's all these little things. And yeah, it doesn't look like they're going to be competing at this event, really. Hooksy, we know, has, outside of the game, problems coming in.
Oh, of course, yes.
That is true.
Which makes you believe he's not going to be on top of things. The rest of the team probably want to cut him, probably want to move on. So we're just going to see a really flat G2, I think. The thing is with this year, it's been pretty much a waste. Outside of the fact that you've given Monacy some LAN experience, some crowd experience, and realized, that was a fine move. But I think they've botched all of their signings, really, they've made over the past 12 months. Like, they brought in both Alexi B and Monacy, never gave Nexo a chance with a competent AWPer. Then they cut Alexi B and Jax. So they cut the IGL, bring a new IGL, cut the glue guy who Hunter claims to love, and then bring in another guy who is far from the emotional core of a team, let's put it that way, for JKS. And every time it's just not worked. They've had like a couple runs of sort of honeymoons, like that Katowice second place, which was just Nico deciding to go and finish second at that event. And there's been not a whole lot else. And yes, if you're a G2 fan, the three amongst everyone who still exists, there's not much to look up for. You have no idea what the plan is going into next year, aside from probably not Hooksy. And you've got some fraggers who might be able to win something if the right pieces are assembled. It's been a mess. I think this is going to end with a whimper. And I pray for them that they have something good coming into the next season, because this ain't it.
The thing is, I'm actually genuinely shocked by how underwhelming this G2 lineup. I mean, even the call when they had Alexi B and Jax in the line. I'm genuinely shocked by how underwhelming it is. Like, aside from the Katowice run, they are just a team where it's like they lose way earlier than you'd think. Players don't perform to the level you'd expect, and it isn't just one event. Like, you can look over 3-6 months of these players, and some of them just never perform, or they do the odd game, and like something about the core structure just never worked. It's why another thing I've been thinking about the last few years, because I've seen too many teams that were like built piece by piece now. I think building piece by piece might actually be the worst way to build in esports. Like, the actual best way seems to be you just get a core of 3 that works, and then you bring in pieces that work with them. And it's like you take care of one problem, you've got like the base area, and then you can just put single piece. Because when you bring like 5 players together, I know this wasn't totally like that, but they did add in these extra pieces. I don't know that it works. Like, I think you lack an identity. You don't know, everyone's coming from different teams or different playing styles. Because like every time I watch it, like even people like Monacy, some of the games he has, like he actually does do like the mini simple thing where he'll have games where he has 20 kills, but you watch it and you're like, that was just all right. He could have done a lot more. He could have dominated more, you know. It wasn't like a 20, like, oh shit, watch this. Like, that's so on the one hand, that's a sign you have a lot more to potentially do in the game, but it's also a bad sign. Like, no one's getting out of you. So, and then even the Nico angle, this year is probably the hardest year of Nico's whole career to assess. Because if you look at the raw numbers, they still look really good on hltv.org, but it might just be me, but I feel like he has had the most predictable runs ever in these tournaments, which is he farms the group stage. He's a monster there. He is the player you'd think he is there. But every time they're in the playoff series that they lose, he just does fuck all. I'm telling you, he just disappears, becomes average. Now, look, he is Nico, so he's not like whiffing a shot and just looking like an idiot. It just doesn't carry the game, unfortunately. And sadly, the one thing from last year everyone thought was guaranteed was that he would hard carry, and then, you know, you'd add it like the Zewu equation, like, well, if we're taking care of him, now let's go to these players. Even Nico has games that are quiet sometimes with both the IGLs. So I don't know. I think this is actually, by the way, of all the teams in the 8, like I was saying, the Liquid one has all. I think this is the hardest one of all. Like, not only are there very few people you can cut, like, spoiler, you paid 600k for Monacy, you're not cutting him, and he's developed. Nico's never getting cut, and if Hunter really has to remain because he's Nico's cousin, we've only got 2 people we're allowed to cut. We've already replaced them this year, so there's another example of why it's a really, like, that's a hard core to work with if I have to keep those 3 players and I can't under any circumstances cut them. Meanwhile, if there was a world, it isn't possible, sadly, where you could at least consider a Hunter move, if all I could do is reboot the team but just start with Monacy and Nico, hey, it could put in a lot of different players and maybe make this work. So I don't know. Like, I haven't even heard any implication. There hasn't even been a rumour as to who they might sign as IGL. So as much as we all think Huxley's going out, obviously, sadly, the circumstances aren't perfect for him. But who's coming in? Because I always thought that was the wackest move they did this year, by the way. The wackest move for real was the Huxley signing, and this is why. Because even coming in, he wasn't a big name. Even coming in, no one was like, this is the player I want in the... Like, here's the difference. I'll take it on the chin. I told them, literally, their owner to get Alexi B. That's because I thought it could be really good. No one was begging Carlos to get fucking Huxley. You know what I mean? So it's like, to me, I think they just spun their wheels for like 6 months for no reason. They just wasted, well, maybe 5 months, whatever it was. They just sort of wasted the last period of time, and they're probably almost certainly just going to have to replace them again. So that's money down the drain, a waste of time. Oh, I don't know, mate. This team just seems like a mess to me. I almost, for real, like I said, just want to reset the whole thing.
Yeah, I think you're completely right. Keeping Nico and Monacy would be the ultimate kind of like get out of jail free card for G2, because then you could really go wherever you pleased. But I mean, I think that Hunter would stay in this roster, and if Hunter leaves, I think Nico might leave straight up. I don't feel as though either of those players would be willing to just give that the other player up. I think that bond is way too tight to break up. So that's why I was more so like, okay, well, if we can find a way to re-unlock Hunter and make him the player that he was before, then maybe you can make it work. And at that point, you kind of just have to look to what are the pieces that are setting him up. It is JKS, it is Huxley, but these are obviously the players that you just signed. Yeah. And even if you try to get rid of Huxley, I mean, the IGL market is pretty dry right now. You'd pretty much have to end up poaching somebody, and I don't think that there's really anybody you could poach that is willing to give up their IGL right now. Then you try to look to free agents, and then that whole conversation of they haven't played that much as of recent. I mean, you look to like an Alex or like a MSL or something like that. They haven't really played too many officials. And then the same issue of they can't really frag also comes into play. And then we get back into the same cyclical argument.
Yes. By the way, just as an aside, technically Alex is off the table, though. He said that like he has health issues or something. He's just not going to play professionally again. Just for people who forgot. It was only like a month ago he said it or something. What about this then? Do you have a final thought, KingT? Jump in if you have.
No, I've a stupid idea brewing that
Come on,
worth sharing.
hit me with
it's
it.
Basically, just so it's Hunter IGL. Firstly, we're going straight off the deep end, I think.
Yeah.
Sense, but
it was implied they're actually up for that, by the way. I think they said in an interview they're up for that idea.
They keep talking about how smart he is or his brain for whatever. The sort of things they say in interviews that rarely is true, but let's pretend it is. And Hunter becomes the IGL. You then need to fill 2 spots. I'm cutting Hoaxy and JKS. I know it's a bit crazy. I'm going to Bulgaria. I think there's a small pool. There's the remaining dregs of their miniature golden generation that was basically the top of tier 2 for a while. There's a small pool of players you can pick from. I think that's where your, in this sense, solution lies. But the best players I can think of, unfortunately, comes at 3 with an AWPer, which I'm not willing to do. But if you could bring in someone like Rainwaker alongside someone like Ships or Victor, maybe Dreamer would be better. There's some bootleg solution like that, just to hit the Balkan theme, I think would be amusing in that sense. But it's just a crazy sort of thing that happens in the back of your head. We're like, technically, there's a 5 players, but I don't think you should. That's just all that was going on.
The reason that's not as terrible as you think, by the way, is one, I actually know those players are actually fairly skilled. That's why they were mega onliners for so many years and they were so good. And then the other thing is, you're actually at least on the right track, which is, this is a point Cassard made when I did an interview with him. The big problem G2 also has is they've spent so much budget this year. Like, think about Monacy to JK. Like, they've been paying these buyouts all over the place. The LXEB, like, they've spent a lot of money. So as much as we all want to keep going, like it's sports, like buy another superstar, they're probably not going to do that. They probably are, just like the Hooksy move, going to go cheap, which means, by the way, your suggestion, if it worked, would at least be on the table. I mean, assuming these are like reasonable buyouts, you can get someone for 20k, 50k, that might be the move they have to do, something along those lines.
Yeah, I'm not sure Rainwaker and Ships are even in a real org. I'm thinking they're on a 500. I've never heard of the name before they made this roster. Who knows who owns it, if it's a player-run thing. There might not be that much of a buyout to consider, so those are probably dirt cheap options.
Sure.
I think Shuhei might not be a bad option either from Gamer Legion. He's not proven necessarily, but I did see a lot of great pieces that he kind of brought together. It would be kind of ironic to pick him up after the RMR situation, but I still think that he could be a relatively cheaper option. I think Gamer Legion don't necessarily have, I think, the biggest buyouts if I had to guess. And I think he's somebody that can definitely frag. I think he's definitely shown that he can frag at on a LAN stage, so maybe that's possible.
Right, here's the big question that there is no good answer to, because either way, one set of people's going to look down on you. KingT, Outsiders are the world champions. What do you think of them at this event?
I think they'll make a run. I think they'll get out of this group, even though on paper could look tough to some people. I think they just have too much of a map pool and too much of a stylistic niche for someone like Liquid or G2 to give them like any real problems. I think they're an outside shot to make the final. I was speaking with Yumi earlier today. He picked them to win the event. I wouldn't go that far, but I do like them to go deep here. I believe in the system. I believe in the players. I've believed in some of them for quite a while. And yeah, I don't see them slowing down here. Maybe after the winter break, when some roster moves happen, the map pool might be less of a positive in their favor. But until then, I still think this team is really dangerous and one of the few solid, well-constructed, well-thought-out, well-rounded rosters we have lying about. Everyone else has issues, problems. They basically don't. It's a bit strange to say that. They don't have the biggest names. They don't have the deepest talent pool even, because, guys like Kicker and Orbit maybe don't appear in the headlines very often. But overall, this roster just seems super solid. And in an era where no one seems to be really on it, they're going to thrive. So I still see them going deep here.
A big thing that I was pushing for in my pick'ems every time I would pick Outsiders to advance to the next stage was that you always knew what you were going to get with them. There was never a situation where they would feel pressure. There's no situation where you would see a drop in performance from these guys. And usually wherever they would end up in a tournament would be the place that you would have expected them to end up. And essentially say, okay, well, the team that they lost to had more firepower, they had a better structure, blah, blah, blah. And you could make the case that Outsiders deserve to show up 7th to 8th in a tournament. But and I think that could actually play to their advantage entirely in a tournament like this where honestly every team is in flux. I don't think there's a single team here that don't have their fair share of issues right now. And so I think that they could definitely top the group, but I think they'll definitely, one thing's for sure, I think they'll definitely get through the group. I don't know if they'll top the group. There's definitely room for them to, but I think that I don't necessarily feel as though they'll win against FaZe. And that's, I think, the biggest thing that outsiders have against them is that they haven't beaten any elite teams thus far beyond Vitality in a best of one. And you kind of look at the reps that the teams that they've had to beat. It's teams that do not include FaZe, Na'Vi, and Cloud9, and I believe Liquid as well. They'll be playing Liquid for the first time against outsiders in the opening round. And that in and of itself kind of makes me feel, okay, yeah, sure, the system is fantastic. I love the system that they've provided. But then when you get to play some of these tenured teams, that's when you really get those systems pushed to the limit. That's where some of the holes that could potentially pop up, like, is Fame going to produce that same level at the Rio Major throughout in the World Final? Is Flit supposed to be that next superstar for this squad? Is Norbert being that big hole in this roster going to become a glaring issue for this team at the biggest stage? I mean, I think Norbert definitely served his purpose at the Rio Major, but I think that it could be a potential issue for them moving forward. And against those teams like a FaZe, like a Na'Vi, like a Vitality, although that they have their own issues, you still have to give the benefit of the doubt to those teams and suggest that there is still those hurdles to overcome before you suggest that they are world beaters and title contenders.
I'm going the other way on this one because I actually feel like this is the moment I'm going to like sell while at a tie, as it were, on outsiders. Because I actually think the major was like the perfect storm. Like, as we say, like they didn't play a lot of the top teams. They were basically playing teams like Mouse, Fnatic. Like, these are not like the teams that you're scared of, etc. And they're not super experienced teams anyway. And also, I just think the numbers they put up are unsustainable. Like the numbers, like James alone was like a 1.3 rating or something at the major. Like, I've seen James' whole career. He's not going to do that every tournament. Someone like Fame was very, very good, but I'm just going to give everyone, you'll know what I mean when I say this, I'll give everyone the bit warning, which is everyone loved to go so deep on bit when he did those first, like basically the first 4 or 5 months. He dropped off. He just became a good player, just not an average player in Na'Vi at times. So essentially, if anything goes wrong, the problem I have with this team, I think it's the same with the real Heroic, is both these teams, like for me, the strength is like the stylistic approach. They have a very distinct style and they have amazing cohesion. And even then, they tend to both win very narrowly. So I think that means essentially you have to be at like your peak level because they haven't got the greatest players in the world. They've just got good players. And each team also has a similar problem, which is neither of them, in my opinion, has a true like number one superstar type player. Like they don't look as much as like a problem in G2. They do have Nico. If you look at like Fame's very good, he's really young in his career. James, the IGL, so I never expect him to like carry every game. That's the one issue I have with outsiders. So look, I think they should be in a playoff team here. They should get out of the group. The problem they have is, look, there is a universe where maybe someone goes crazy like Liquid or someone just beats them in the group, but you'd probably have to play them twice if you know, because it's the GSL style. So I expect them to still get through. My problem is if they come in second, you're probably playing Na'Vi or Vitality in the quarterfinals. And that's the problem, is those are the teams that I expect to be able to beat them. In fact, this is just a quick prediction. I actually think what you will find makes this style of outsiders work a lot less. It's just the one thing no one can account for, which is if one player like a simple Lazzy who just goes absolutely supernova, I mean, we've seen in Counter-Strike, there's no solution to that. Like, you can try just being a better team, but, I mean, good luck. A lot of people have tried that, and they had to just tip their hat and just give it up because the guy dropped 40 or something. So, I'm waiting to see. Like, I do think in general, but I enjoy watching this team play, and they're always going to be my dark horse. But I think now, people do think they're ready to go and win more trophies, whereas, like, I don't know. And plus, I think there'll just be a bit of a hangover effect where the last time it was the major. They didn't play the fall finals. They're coming into one last event. They have a lot of pressure on them now, by the way. The days of just coasting by and catching everyone off guard, that is gone. And then also, there's another thing. Every analyst who works for these teams will have watched those demos. That was the major, guys. That's the fucking finals. So they'll also be way more studied, in my opinion. So I'm interested to see, essentially, we put together all the other best teams in the world. Let's see how they do against the outsiders problem. So I think the top teams will clear that gap, basically. Let's go on then. Let's move on to... Let's just skip straight into a fun one. What about this KingT? What about Na'Vi? Because I've got to tell you right now, I don't know what the fuck. This could be nothing. It could be everything. Who knows? Where's Na'Vi going to be at?
They're going to be frustrating because they're going to win their map picks and they can almost pick 3 maps, I think, and win them consistently. The problem is they just can't seem to close it if it's someone else's pick. They can't seem to close it if it's map 3. Simple hasn't looked godly, which is alarming to everyone, because obviously when Superman bleeds, everyone sheds a tear because all of a sudden the world's collapsing, right? But the biggest issue isn't Simple. The issues are with electronic calling, he hasn't been quite himself. He's taken more of that sort of IGL opening frag style where you're just doing the volume, creating the space, but dying a lot, not finding the impact you usually have. And Bit has just... Well, he's not become an average player on Na'Vi, he's become an average player, which is a problem, because if he's not actually performing, it doesn't matter who your 5th is, if it's SDY, if it's who else you're going to go sign, you're not going to be able to really keep up with people because he's your 3rd real star. Perfecto's going to do Perfecto things. You even saw in the game, like the series where they looked weak towards the end there in the major, he still put up numbers in his tough spots, doing his traditional Perfecto thing. But I think the biggest issues are that electronic and Bit duo, that complication of one's got to lead and be a player. Can he do it at a high level? We saw initially a bit, yes, and then afterwards, no. Bit, can he come back to just being like just that 1.1 rated version of him? Like, I'm going to use that number just to refer to him. Like, he doesn't have to be the superstar everyone claimed he would be when he started off. Never bought in on that as well, but he can't be bad, which is essentially what he's been relative to his position. And I'd hope we see a better version of him, but I have my doubts. So Na'Vi for me are, if they come out this group, it's likely in 2nd or 3rd. Because remember, 3 teams come out of the groups. The groups
that's true. Yes,
trivial in that sense. And I see them going out 5th to 6th. Like, I think they go through in 2nd or 3rd and then lose that series. I don't like their matchup against outsiders, actually, because I don't think Simple's going to show us Superman Simple, and everyone else is sort of a question mark. So I like outsiders in that series. I think outsiders has the best rifler going into it. If current form holds, Flit would be the best rifler on the server. So yeah, I'm not hugely impressed by Na'Vi right now.
I think there are a lot of issues. I mean, obviously, there's that whole synergy issue with SDY. When initially the move happened, it always felt like it was a very short-term situation where you would have the fragging core of Simple, Bit, and Electronic firing on all cylinders, and it would all work out because SDY would be out of the way and allow for this core to kind of perform and do what it needed to do. But now, as you're saying, KingT, with Bit falling off in his performance and Simple looking a little bit more mortal than usual, it really creates that glaring issue of we need something from somebody else. And SDY isn't able to produce that either because, I mean, he did make a lot of mistakes throughout the Rio Major. In that Furious series in particular, him being that A anchor, he could not hold that bomb site to save his life. No matter what execute was being thrown at him, he somehow looked like he was making the worst decision every single time. I don't know if it was pressure. I don't know if it was just kind of the environment that was given to him, but he just didn't produce enough numbers and enough to allow for the rest of that core to perform. Obviously, Perfecto, I don't even think he is an issue for this team. He's been an absolute rock for them. But looking forward, you're thinking of bringing in NPL, Nipple, whatever his username is. But regardless, I don't think that is the solution either, because I don't think that this team should be going younger. I think that in that specific position that they're trying to replace, I think they should be going older. I think they should be going for somebody that's super experienced, that should be a rock, that shouldn't be kind of phased by any of these kinds of outside conditions. And I think that this just isn't going to work. I think he is too volatile, and even the kind of highs that I've seen, it doesn't look sustainable. And that was at the Academy League. This would be his first ever LAN that he would play at. And to play against, Vitality in your opening round potentially, that just doesn't seem feasible to me. So overall, I think that position is creating this gaping hole within this structure, and it's making players like Simple look mortal. It's making Electronic look like an IGL that can't actually do his job, and I don't necessarily think it's his fault, but with the kind of strategy that they're putting forward, you need firepower and to make it look feasible, and I think SDY just isn't cutting it. I think that's pretty safe to say.
I've got an angle on this that people probably haven't thought of, which is the one concern I have for any future roster move is the most obvious roster move, aside from SDY has to go out, he's the obvious player to move, is to get an IGL, isn't it? Like, that's the obvious move, right? Yeah. Because then he could put Electronic back to his classic roles, which everyone knows he's a land monster on. He even did it briefly when he first switched to IGL. The problem is this, and it's a subtle one, which is I don't think people realize, as far as I know, the push for Electronic to be IGL comes from Blade himself, the core coach. And this is something he'd even implied in past years in interviews. And obviously, he used to have Electronic way back on the flip side, right? So if the logic in Blade's mind is, this is who I'm grooming to become a great IGL, right? To you or me, you might think, well, the obvious thing there, Blade, historically, is when you make him the IGL, his numbers are going to go down. He's not going to be a star player, right? So you can choose that, but you've got to make up for that elsewhere. This is where Blade is a very unique coach. And in my opinion, this is actually a flaw. Blade is a little bit like my old mate Existence, right? Where the main problem they have, fans get this wrong from the outside. They think when they do something wrong that they actually like a lesser and not the good. Their actual problem is that classic saying we have in English, which is the perfect is the enemy of the good. What they try to do is they really believe like in the dream of like famously, right? In one of the old like Titan lineups with Shocks and NBK and all the supposedly what they hated about Existence wasn't the idea his tactics were bad. It's that he actually wanted like way too much tactics. Like he wanted every map to have like all these variations. He wanted people to literally do it flowchart style, and everyone was supposed to memorize what happens at every moment. And that was just too much for some people. Some people were like, look, basically, unless we win, like we're not doing that. That's too much. So the problem I have is people might remember Blade can be stubborn with these moves. Like, I'll just point out two past examples that'll make you immediately remember. Remember, it was Blade's idea. They'll say it's Simple, but Simple's just being a good guy. But I said it was Blade's idea to take fucking Simple off the AWP and put fucking washed up Guardian on the AWP. Remember that move where they put Simple on the Krieg for like 6 months? I mean, it wasn't 6 months with Guardian, but if you remember, originally they had like Flamey as the other AWP or whatever the fuck. So that in itself already, it's the same scenario. I've talked to Blade about that. His logic was, look, he agrees that like temporarily Simple would be better on the AWP, but his logic was, imagine if Simple was the absolute best player in the world, but on a Krieg, so he could also like win more clutches and do more things in the mid round, and then like you could secondary cut. Like his logic was it would be even better. We could like max out. So essentially, he's reaching for absolute perfection. But the problem in his case is, I sometimes feel like that gets in the way of what would be the switch now. And then the last thing I would say is, everyone was loving Na'Vi on LAN last year, but remember before we went to LAN, dude, everyone was hating on that team the whole year online. When they think about how they didn't just bring Bit in, everyone forgets that. They were doing like a fucking Nivera. He was just playing like certain maps at first. And it was only when Flamey absolutely bottomed out, they were like, right, go on to Bit. Because everyone's going to tell the story now that Blade's just a genius and was like, remove Flamey and Bit could be one of the best players in the world. He didn't do that. Like, look, he did bring him in. He did, as far as I can tell, scout him, pick him. But even he didn't know this was the slam dunk move. So basically, all I'm saying is, I do think Blade is a genius and one of the best coaches. But I do think people are doing that confirmation bias where everything that works is like, that was all Blade. Anything that doesn't work is like, obviously Blade wasn't involved with that. Like, let's get this player out. So my problem is, essentially, as far as I know, Blade does decide everything in this team. He does have a massive amount of control from the top down, like a lot of other coaches, by the way, dream of. I've heard even some big name coaches don't have the control he does. So I think he might be a potential impediment, because as far as I know, he's the one who's chosen some of these pieces, chosen these role swaps, put them into place. And quite frankly, ever since they came back from the player break, man, this team is whack. It's just whack. Before that, they were mega. Like, people know they almost won Cologne. They did win Blast. Like, it was working really good at first with the SDY move. But man, they've been so underwhelming these last few months. Like, part of me still can't believe they lost that quarterfinal to Furia. I remember seeing that bracket and seeing earlier in the day Cloud9 go out and go, dude, Navi's just winning the major. Like, and even worse, I was even prepared, like, they're going to win, and then we're going to have to spend all of history explaining that it wasn't that good a run, you know, and then they didn't even win that match. Like, they didn't even give me a chance to critique the win. So I like, that's why I say to me, the Na'Vi one, I don't know anyone that's super hyped on him at the moment, but it's just such a depressing story to me. I have no idea where this team's going right now.
I don't even think that. I mean, the IGL move could definitely work, and if Electronic stays in that way, it's fine, I guess. But I think that, I mean, if you could find a way to like poach Hobbit from Cloud9, or maybe try to get like a Forester from Entropic, the Entropic pieces, that could definitely work. I mean, I think the roles definitely check out. You have a player, both of those players are definitely land proven, and they could definitely put up enough numbers to allow for Bit to get back to his former self. It removes the pressure on Electronic shoulders that he has to frag out as an IGL, even with the positions that he has. And I think that it could make this team look completely rejuvenated. And again, those players being as land proven as they are would allow for Simple to feel much more comfortable in whatever kind of endeavor that he wants to take on the team, because as of right now, it doesn't look like he's comfortable. Obviously, there's outlying conditions to everything that's going on with him, and that is completely understandable. But I think in server, those issues are also a problem, and I think they've all compounded to making him look just average in certain scenarios, and that's the issue.
By the way, KingT, your line earlier was actually a banger now I think about it. You're right. If you actually put the Outsiders and the Na'Vi teams next to each other, and obviously Simple's the AWPer, dude, the best rifler actually is Flit right now. It's not even an RV player like the joke was last year. It'd be like compete if it was the best. It actually is Flit right now. It just would be. You're right.
Yeah.
That's wild.
It's alarming, isn't it?
That is. That alone's an alarming statement right there. Exactly. Right. What about this then? So there's 2 teams left, and I've left 2 of the big dogs, obviously. So let's just do Vitality first, and we'll end on FaZe. So Vitality is another team where obviously they won Pro League, but after that they've basically done sweet fuck all. Like they didn't get through the online showdown, so they weren't at the last 4 finals. At the major, they qualified, but then obviously did that thing where they went 3-2 and then just bombed out in the next one and lost to fucking Ents. And spoiler, even Ents wasn't good that major. It's not like that's the other thing about some of these teams that like what BNE and Ents. The reason they absolutely fucked that major is they beat potential favourites and then weren't even good themselves. It's like brilliant. So you can't even at least hold up that end. So I think a lot of people. I know I was being a bit edgy by like pushing Vitality up when they were winning Pro League and making them like my 3rd best team or whatever. But I think a lot of people now are just out on this team. It feels like a lot of people have just abandoned it, or they think it's just the Zemu show only. So KingT, where are you at on Vitality?
I'm hopeful. I don't think I have any real right to be based on most recent results, but I watched Pro League, I watched that grand final in way too much detail, trying to break it down for a video, and I've come to some conclusions. Firstly, ZywOo is still not the problem, won't be probably ever at this rate, but the riflers are all, of course, disappointing. I think the biggest issue there is right now, it's dupreeh, primarily not really being sure what his role is and if he's supposed to be good. Because if he's supposed to be supportive, it's kind of like doing the same thing Apex seems to be doing. But the other side of the thing is Spinks, supposed to be a star rifler. But his CT sides have been baffling. Like, he looks so bad. I think there's a map of Overpass where he's playing A toilets, and every single round, he at best got a kill and died, but way too early in the round to have any impact, to stop the flow of rotations, to actually prevent a bomb site take. It was always early on, got trapped, got himself stuck, died. It's like he has no idea what he's doing. And then on T side, he has maps where he looks phenomenal, but it's never even slightly consistent. Like, not even slightly. So I know what can work on this team. I'm optimistic in the belief that they can show it again, but I know I'm kind of just purely on just French copium. Like, I'm inhaling the baguettes right now. Like, it's just all copium, all Frenchness just oozing out of me to decide this Vitality team has a chance of being really relevant. Like, they have maps they can pick into that are good. They're still competitive and like on Mirage, no matter who picks it. Like, I like certain things about this team. I know where the flaws are. I just have to believe they'll be better.
By the way, just as an aside, since you were bringing up the whole French angle, if people don't know, I did like a fun bet on Twitter because England was playing France in the World Cup. And look, I didn't really think England was better. Like, France is, well, actually it's debatable. If you look at the talent of the 2 teams, maybe England's roster is better, but France historically is just always a much better team in the World Cup. But what's hilarious is no one picked me up on this detail, which is I did one of those bets where I can't really lose. Because the bet was, it was a jersey bet with Apex from Vitality, who obviously supports France, right? So the bet I made with him was this. If he wins, so France wins, I get a jersey that's like a France jersey. I get Apex written on the back, right? And if I win, England wins, then he has to get the England jersey with Thorin written on the back. Here's what he hadn't figured out there. That's not really a fair deal, is it? Because here's the difference. Actually, I'm going to have to get this France jersey. That's going to be a cool piece of memorabilia. Apex are really famous players, won majors, being like, and France is just a good team. The joke is, it was a way bigger downside to him to have some dickhead Thorin England jersey. That's why it's actually mad I got away with that, boys. I sort of couched it so I couldn't lose. So I don't even mind, because as I say, the joke as well, spoiler, Paladin, is because I'm the esports historian. I've just created a piece of memorabilia from esports history that I own now. Cool. Cheers. That's worth the price of admission. So just thought I'd throw that out there. But come on, what are your thoughts on Vitality, Paladin?
If I had to give a power ranking of teams that I feel are stable right now, I would put them bang at 3rd right now. And they've had all of the time in the world to rectify whatever issues that they've been having. And honestly, I think Spinks has been thrown into the deep end for sure, and it's deservedly so with the kind of talk that's being discussed about him. He does look very average after his stint on Ents, and that is just disappointing because this guy was hailed to be a potential top 10 player, honestly. Yeah,
sure.
top 10 player altogether, maybe a potential best rifler altogether, and he was just such a great all-around player. He could plug and play in whatever roles he chose on ENCE, and it worked so well. And now you plug and play into him in a Vitality roster that now looks dysfunctional. It requires a lot of the pressure now to be on the shoulders of ZywOo and Magisk. So I think both of those players have been very serviceable. Magisk especially, I think, has been very consistently outputting multi-kills for this squad and bailing them out of a lot of late-round scenarios, that I think that he should be an absolute staple for this team moving forward. I do still think that dupreeh looks a little bit lost on this roster as well. That is my biggest issue. dupreeh and Spinks kind of feel out of place. And I think Apex, look, I think with how volatile of a player he is in general and the kind of space that he creates on this team, I think it's still fine. I don't really have too much. I think he's kind of the last piece that I would move around personally. But I think the biggest glaring issue overall is, what do they really pick? They like having Mirage picked into them, but Dust2 is now out of the pool, and Dust2 was their staple. And now I'm seeing rumors and suggestions being thrown around that they should be picking into Anubis, but that is such a risk, a Hail Mary for a team like this that should be kind of one of the most stable rosters in this entire tournament to kind of go through with Anubis. But I don't feel like they should. But then if they don't, then where do they go? Maybe a Vertigo, but I think Vertigo is also a very volatile map to pick all in all. And in their opening round against Na'Vi, it's their permaban, so they won't even be able to flex that. So overall, I think that although that I personally think that they're a very stable roster, I think you're looking to ZywOo and Magisk to kind of do the heavy lifting. And I think they can definitely get out of the group, but I don't think that they can necessarily contend for the title per se. And that's my issue, because overall it just feels very dysfunctional. Even though I'm saying that it's very stable, it's still a very dysfunctional roster across the board, beyond Magisk and ZywOo, in my opinion.
You know what's wild is when you were saying all that there, I also realized if you're Spinks, here's also why you absolutely did sign up for like a very, very difficult job, is because the other thing is, anytime dupreeh does shit, you're just going to get more shit. You're going to go, what do you mean? Because no one wants to fucking criticize dupreeh. Like, if you notice dupreeh, I'm getting worried now, guys, because when he joined this team earlier this year, when they made the move of him and Magisk and Zonic came over, I can tell you behind the scenes, they weren't coming just to be nobodies, you know. They were coming to get paid and potentially be on a top team again. And by the way, these guys for real believed they could be like their old Astralis form and be, you know, I bet in their minds, for real, this part's speculation, but I would bet in their minds, they thought, dude, we could do even better than Astralis. Like, basically, we've like upgraded from Device to ZywOo. Like, fuck, we've got the other guys out of the team that were having issues. They've got no Zipniks. Like, maybe we fucking run the table. Maybe we win everything. So my question would be, like you said earlier, KingT, does dupreeh know he's supposed to be a sport development? If he is, then look, he's got the experience. He could probably do it. But if he's supposed to actually be fragging out, then he's just a fucking bad player right now. I've got to say it. And this is what's worrying me. This is what I'm going to bring it back to. What's worrying me is dupreeh is already at the status I remember Olofmeister being in FaZe Clan, where nobody criticizes because it's such a legendary player that everyone loves. By the way, another player where every pro loves him. He says nobody has a beef with him. He's a very amiable guy, just like Olofmeister. And if you remember, at the end of FaZe Clan, the only time people would talk about Olofmeister would be when it would be some whack angle, like, oh, he's made another major. And they would just, that's why I bring up the dupreeh angle. You find some like whack way to almost imply that they're still at their best. Like, wow, another major, Olof. Well done. It's like, mate, it's only another major because the others just let him stay in this team. Like, what are we talking about? So I have the same problem with dupreeh. Is like, when they won Pro League, I actually thought he did do like a decent job. He won a bunch of clutches and he sort of like did late game plays that were decent. But if you were just looking like early in that series at the real first map, he was fucking garbage. He just was a subpar player against Team Liquid, by the way, not even against like Na'Vi or something. So I think this team has a whole bunch of problems again themselves, because it's another group where it's like, I don't really think there's a player that can't be on the team, but I don't know about this mix. Like, something's still off with the blend a bit, you know. It's why the other guy that, quite frankly, this will reflect badly on if this iteration doesn't work, is going to be Zonic. Because, mate, he came in with the perfect resume, right? And he was gambling it by going to this other squad, especially bringing some of his old players. Because, put it this way, the one thing we can't all do is go, well, Zonic, it's not your fault. It's that bloody dupreeh. Oh, right, yeah, shit. Like, that's your boy. What do you know? Like, I'm sorry. Yeah, if there's anyone supposed to be the dupreeh, it's got to be Zonic, right? So, yeah, I have a problem because basically for me, the only player I wouldn't put any blame on at all is actually ZywOo. I think everyone else has their own different way that you can critique them. Even the Magisk one, because another thing I have with the Magisk one is supposedly when Spinks came in, they also switched up some of Magisk's roles. That's why he was fragging more. Even that's just like bro, why are we waiting for that to happen before you get roles that would help you? Like, didn't you see how whack we were for all those months? Like, you could have just been playing these other roles and fragging out. Like, what? Like, why are you keeping that to yourself? You know what I mean? Remember, people are billing this guy as a potential IGL and stuff. So I still think, quite frankly, unless they win tournaments, just because the coach is Danish guys, I think that eventual Magus IGL move just feels inevitable. Like, because even if it's not that, like, you don't have to be bad even. It's just always going to be the what if, isn't it? It's like, but what if we had done that? So I think eventually they're gonna scratch that itch eventually. It might not, look, it's not going to be after this event, but it's going to happen eventually, in my opinion. That's my take.
Yeah, and that probably means goodbye Apex. I don't think you keep him around if he's not.
Seems likely, right? Yeah.
Like, I love him as a sort of emotional lead on a team at times. Like, he can really bring a lot of energy. He can bring some impact. But no, I think at that point you go look for someone else. I think my mind jumps to Valder, but I don't know. You'd have to assess it when time comes. But the IGL change seems like sort of thing where you would probably fall back to it. If it keeps going wrong, keeps not performing, you're not getting the roles right, you would probably change the IGL and just cut Apex. I think that makes the most sense even at that point.
Yes. Right, what about this then? Go on.
No, and I think at that point you might as well just make the core Danish. Like, I mean, you've already got Zonic on the team, you've got Magiska IGLing. You can stay in English, but I think that then at that point Vitality just becomes a Danish org, essentially.
I'll even throw in, by the way, no one's really properly tried this, except like maybe when Smoothie was in Big or whatever. But the real reason why people are so scared with the English language thing of like, oh, I've got to all speak. I don't even think that's true. Like, for example, if you had 4 Danish players in Ziwu, mate, if Ziwu's like playing fucking, I don't know, middle on Mirage, like the 2 players who play a site together can talk Danish all they want. Like he wasn't listening to that comm. And also, if it's just some intricacies of the setup, they can say anything they want in Danish. Like, I don't even think that's as big a deal as people make out. Like, if it was just the AWP and it's a superstar player anyway. So I wouldn't be against moving that direction. I think the French angle is just because it's the French org, right? That's all that's really keeping them at this point, and that you want Ziwu. So it's more like, to me, look, you would never go back to French. You're just not going totally away from English entirely. So you could have a hybrid mix in the middle, I think. I've even heard of teams that were like that, where, in fact, if people don't know this, he doesn't do it now, but when the aforementioned Olof Meister used to play in the last FaZe Clan last year, him and Rain did sometimes talk in Swedish, actually. That's actually an interesting detail. If you ever go back and listen to the comms, you'll see it sometimes. Sometimes Rain would just say something to him if it was like a specific CT setup or something, or, you know, like flash me in or whatever. Like, they actually would switch to Swedish, and obviously it twists them. I've no fucking clue what they're saying, but it's not really relevant, is it? They don't, unless you're in the player, don't worry about it. So there's one team left. I've left till the end, the big dogs, FaZe. Because here's the problem. If they'd have won one more bloody round, it'd be a totally different convo we'd be having now, wouldn't it? It'd be all like, fucking hell, is it back on? Is the era on? They've won the tournament. And how many events were there in 2022? What can we call it? I'd have been fully in my bag, don't worry about it, boys. And spoiler, I would have won about $8,000 or something fucking ridiculous style, thanks to them just blowing it completely there. Because I did everything. I had like the outright winner, I had the winner of the final, I did it all. So cheers, Cadian. Thanks for that, you fucking rat. Whatever. Anyway, probably did cheat all those years ago, if I had to guess. Nah, who knows about that? I'll leave that up to 100 and Esic to not figure out. So, right, come on then, KingT. What are your thoughts on FaZe, though? Because this is another one where, I mean, I feel like a lot of people are ready to bail on FaZe.
I'm not there. I was, obviously, like everyone, shocked, appalled, horrified, what other words you want to use, at the major. And Blast, yeah, they didn't win it. It wasn't convincing, even some of their wins, but it was better. It was more like the FaZe we'd kind of gotten used to. It never has to be that they just smash you. They just eventually win. And that's kind of what we started to see again at Blast. And I think here, they might not be the bookies' favourites, who apparently still value heroic. This is the problem.
And that's so weird.
I haven't updated to esports, it seems. Like, I've raked it in betting on esports the last few years. But FaZe, I still think should be favourites here. Honestly, you look at everyone else, FaZe's turmoil is they didn't perform at the major, and they've had a bit of a streak of events where they weren't great, but the roster still works. The roster makes sense. Coming to this event, they had a pretty good uptick from their last one. I think this is it. They should be favourites here. I haven't picked them to win it just because it was funnier not to at the time, but I think, yeah, on paper, they're definitely favourites. And yeah, a team to be afraid of. Anubis coming in hasn't really messed them around too much. They're still going to be able to pick the maps they like to pick and have series go their way in the veto for the most part. So yeah, FaZe for me, no doubts, no worries really. They should be fine here.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that FaZe should be the favorites to win the entire tournament. There's no reason why they shouldn't be. And I think in the fall finals, it was very reminiscent of all the tournaments that they've won thus far, and it was on track to be that way, bar that final series. And I mean, you even had like the crazy Rops 4K 14-14 money going to break if Rops goes down and he pulls out a rabbit out of the hat on the lower bomb side of Nuke. And yet still they lose that very close series against Heroic, and we would have had a different scenario for sure. But regardless, I think the identity of FaZe is back, and that in and of itself has me feeling like they can edge out basically any team that is in the pool right now. I don't think they'll have any trouble in their group by any means. I think they'll get pretty comfortably out. And then from then on, you've got Na'Vi, Vitality, and Heroic. Na'Vi again in flux, Heroic with their stand-in scenario, and Vitality, which who the hell knows what kind of Vitality we're going to be getting at the tournament. And so overall, I don't feel like there is genuinely a threat that I could say at the peak of their powers, this could be a team that just absolutely topples FaZe. I mean, sure, there are still some underlying issues with kind of Brokey in certain scenarios doesn't necessarily make the right decision, and you can definitely see that he cost FaZe a lot of rounds in that final against Heroic, but you still have the two of the best riflers that you could ask for right now in the world in Rops and Twists. And overall, they are doing serviceable enough jobs that the system still works as intended, and their identity still seems intact, and they still seem like the FaZe of old that can outclutch any team that's thrown at them. Heroic definitely being an outlier in that scenario rather than kind of the end-all be-all as to what we should be thinking about FaZe.
I actually do have FaZe winning this event. I actually do think they're still the best team overall. Like, I look at the squad, none of the players are really bad. Like, no one's really had a slump. It's just people had individual matches or tournaments that they weren't as good. Even Rain actually was picking it up again for the Blast finals that they almost won just now. Like, the actual team in general still seems like it works. You look at the major, it was 1BO3, and even then, by the way, they were leading massively on the third map, and they almost won, and they lost an OT. Like, it's not like they got beaten and smashed by BNE or something like that. And then the other thing for me is, I actually think it's key that we mentioned the map pool with this team, right? They're a team that could easily afford Dust 2 to go out. There wasn't some like awesome map for them. It was just a whatever map that they played if the other team picked it, basically. So I actually think when you look, first of all, Carrigan's already someone who always has some like weird angle on the veto and how he fucks around with it. He's even been working Vertigo into the mix the last few months. By the way, that now looks like genius, that you actually started to play the map at least and played it even against BNE at the major. And look, you weren't great, but you weren't terrible either. You almost won the map. It was OT. I actually think they already had overall the best map pool. I think they still do at this point in time. Like as we're saying, think about this, right? If I had to pick, like in this type of a map pool, even the one we had with Just 2, right? Which maps would I want to be the best at? Inferno and Nuke would be my instant picks. Like, everyone plays those maps. What are you talking about? Like that's perfect. So I think if you look at it all the way around, I think it's still overall the best team. I understand why people are apprehensive. They're not like a clear-cut number one team right now. But I even think, I'll weave this last angle in, the fact that the last two big events were won by Outsiders and Heroic, well, no one's saying they're better than FaZe. I noticed that key detail. So if they're not better, then realistically, if those are one-off teams that won, isn't FaZe just de facto still the best? Since Na'Vi's kind of shit, Vitality's mega up and down, Liquid hasn't really got that. You know what I mean? Like, when you run down the others, yeah, it's hard to make the case like FaZe is at their peak, but the others just fall away and they sort of just win by default for me. So I actually think this tournament as well, just like the last Blast one, the other reason I had them winning the Blast Fall finals is I think this format is, if you are the number one, the real best team, this is the best format you can have. Beyond having like a real full double elim bracket, it's everything's best of three, only one team goes out the group. Oh, it's awesome. Like, if you actually are the best, this is where you should win in this format. So I'm going to take FaZe to win the whole thing personally. Any final remarks before we shut it off?
I think Anubis is definitely going to be a very interesting map in the pool, but as we've discussed previously, FaZe shouldn't be affected by that when you have maps like Inferno and Nuke, and no matter what the scenario is going to be, it'll most likely end up with FaZe going into a 3-map series, and they'll definitely be comfortable to edge it out. So I think there should be no issues with outlying circumstances, and even with the kind of changes that are being presented to FaZe this time around, I think they're still the best team here.
Money doesn't grow on trees, and believe it or not, just watching a video for free with the odd ad doesn't really pay the bills. So thanks to the following people for kindly supporting my work and this particular content. And those people are, of course, Ahmed Hadjou, Matt Pugnatio Rajcula, Animosity, Bot Pounder 420, Jensen Goh, Kovacevicd, Tobias Bernasconi, Tosh, Thooorin, and a special thanks always goes out to Jerky's Minion, my main man. You know what? There are plenty of perks to be found on my Patreon. Like, you can find out who upcoming guests are for my reflections, interviews, and talk shows. You can ask me a question in my monthly AMA. Might get roasted if it's a bit spicy in how you phrase it. You can figure out which pieces of content I might want to do next. I often ask people which they think between certain ideas, offer suggestions. You can even take part in one of those long discussions with me about all kinds of esports, whatever's on your mind. So if any of those sound like something that takes your fancy, put your money where your mouth is. Join the Illuminati today via the Patreon link in the description below.